Pause. Hey, all right, host Derek here. Welcome to Talking with Famous People. Why is it that you would affirm things that are objectively false about religion? Courtney, go ahead.
Why would I what confirm things that are objectively false about religion?
Affirm things that are objectively false about religion.
I was just relating it to the concept. In a similar way, people have subjective feelings over which religion they believe in, and then they conform their identity to that system. Just like we have constructs in religious beliefs, we have constructs in gender and things that each gender is supposed to feel and experience and operate under. And so if a male decides that he relates more with the construct of being a woman and wants to conform to that kind of identity, that's a subjective thing inside of himself. It has nothing to do with whether we sit here and prove to people that the earth is not flat. They have conformed to that identity. And your objective logical argument is not going to change their minds. It's a subjective emotional connection.
So what does it mean to identify as something? First of all, what does that mean?
Makes sense. Identify as something?
Yeah.
What does it mean to identify as something? It means a whole lot of things. Like, it can be for sort of subconscious need to belong in a social group, be a member of a group, probably parts of our primitive brain that still exist. People just generally want to conform and feel accepted by others.
Okay. Do you think
In
that's a
one
good way
way.
is that a good way to feel accepted?
Is that a good way to feel accepted?
Yeah.
I think some people need that. Yeah, I think it's beneficial to a lot of people's lives. I think religion is beneficial to a lot of people's lives. I wouldn't personally really conform to some kind of religious doctrine, but some people that suits them better. It makes them happy.
Okay. Well, I identify to the extent if you ask me a question, what do I identify with, a man or a woman or something else? I would say a man. What does that mean?
Because your identity is in sync with the concept of being a man.
Really? So, I mean, if you were to ask
As
me what
far
do
as
I
I
mean
know,
by
I don't
that,
know. I've never really identified as
I
another
would look.
gender.
If you were to ask me, well, what do you mean that you identify as a man? I said, well, you asked me a question, do I identify as a man or a woman? So I've got two choices, and of the two, I identify as a man. And you say, why? I'd say, well, because I've got one X chromosome, one Y chromosome. I have a penis and testicles rather than a vagina and a uterus. I have no breasts. I have facial hair. All the other indications of why one is a man. And then you might say, but I'm
Right, and
interested in you explaining
that's
to me,
the
Eric.
objective understanding. But the new school of thought, after this kind of sociological movement has come about with gender being different than sex, the new school of thought over the topic is gender is not physiological, it is like subjective self-identity,
I mean,
which is kind of like anti-intuitive, but that's what these people are experiencing
eat,
purportedly. So
but look,
your logical reasoning is going to contradict their feelings.
look, here's the thing. There's a difference between gender, which is actually a term that is used for language. Language is the only thing that has gender. And the reason it has gender is not if it's gendered language like people think, but because certain linguistic elements are known as masculine or feminine, unrelated to masculinity and femininity as we understand them. But the conflation here is between gender as an identity thing and masculinity and femininity as individual traits that help to define any and every individual. Any and every individual may be in vast amounts masculine or feminine in their behavior. Again, that's a description that is going to be given by external parties. It's also a self-understanding by the individual, him or herself. So if you were to ask me if I see myself as masculine, then I would say, yeah, I see myself as masculine. And if you were to ask me, why do I see myself as masculine, you'd be asking, what traits do I perceive as masculine about myself? And then you'd ask me, well, why do you think it's important for you to perceive yourself as masculine? I'd say, well, there's a lot of different reasons. And I'd probably point to some of the abuses I suffered as a kid at the hands of peers and stuff. I'd probably point to things I internalized from my dad. I'd probably point to just the fact that some of those vectors of masculinity proved good payoffs for me. In other words, I produced good results with that style of masculine behavior, and so I both reinforced the behavior, and I chose the narrative of masculine to attribute to it because I felt as though that was one way of efficiently functioning as an identity or something. Whether I thought it all through or not is irrelevant. You have a multiple characters to craft out of the raw material you're given. Why craft one that's less effective?
I don't know, Eric. I don't really understand it either. I mean, whenever I think about being feminine, generally the concept is kind of blurry, and I think about being nurturing and being sort of like homey. I mean, sexuality is different, you know what I mean? But femininity, like, I mean, I just think that's kind of a natural occurrence by the way that our bodies are different in a way. Like, males have more testosterone, females have more estrogen, you know, it projects outwards in our behavior that we can differentiate the two. But in terms of like emotional experience, I think that both male and female can experience a lot of the same things.
Well, look, I would say this.
So what you're saying about having like problems when you were a child, and that's kind of projected outwards in your adult life through what you would define as being more masculine, I mean, that's just your individual experience. I think there's plenty of women out there who were probably like had a rough childhood, maybe their dad abused them or something, and they probably are very aggressive women.
Look, I am not making any claims about my perceptions of masculinity or my use of the term masculinity about anything, except to say that that's a much more meaningful thing to talk about than gender. When we talk about somebody having a gender other than the consensus of perception regarding that gender, we are saying we are making into an object that which is not an object. We are making into a claim that which is actually a behavior.
I agree with that in a logical sense, yes, I agree. I think that we're creating another separation dichotomy that's causing social problems. And I mean, it's a dichotomy that's being created because people are experiencing their subjective identity crises in their lives, and they want the world to you know,
they don't want to walk.
Mostly
they don't want to walk down the street and be like murdered. Honestly, like it's right, just like if we're just like, yeah. So it really is an emotional thing. It's not a logical thing. So you're kind of being like counterproductive to the revolution, Eric.
No, I disagree with that. I am being productive to the revolution, and I'll tell you exactly why. For two specific reasons. Number one, I want to draw a very clear distinction. It is perfectly acceptable for anybody who wishes to behave as a woman, who is a man, to do so. And to say, essentially, I must be accepted and treated equally, even though I am behaving as a woman.
Even you saying as a woman kind of implies this sort of imposter, sort
correct.
Of incriminating nature to it. And when you incriminate someone, then violence occurs.
Absolutely not. I have a natural rights-based framework here. Everything is subject to a fundamental ethical framework that dictates action and precludes certain actions. We're talking about prohibited actions here that are not justified by any such thing. Now,
I'm talking about how your language encourages violence.
Don't you dare use utilitarian
utilitarian
justifications to silence my discourse. Shame on you. No, other people's
So-
wrongness cannot be justified to silence my rightness, sir. Unacceptable. Morally reprehensible.
So we should all revert back to using the N-word casually.
You are conflating things that are entirely unrelated now. Now hold your horses.
You were just relating race to it.
Those are absolutely analogous. My rightness doesn't justify your wrongness. Sorry.
I need you to elaborate.
Sure. The equivalency I'm drawing between race and gender is accurate for the purpose of the analogy, and the conclusions I'm drawing from that analogy are accurate. In other words, I'm objectively right, okay? In contrast, you've made the following horrible argument so far. Let me recount it for you. That other people might hear my words and deduce from them that they are justified in violence, and therefore my words, which do not advocate violence, should be silenced. Shame on you for that, sir.
I think that you don't realize the consequence of certain modes of language.
Not responsive.
And so I don't think your intention is that. I don't think your intention is that, but I think that you should probably think more about the way language affects things. That's all I'm saying.
I hope I am. Because what I want to stress here is that it's that sort of thought that somehow my correct discourse, because it doesn't side with your side, justifies violence against people who do side with your side. That's the sort of kind of language that causes coercion, right? So we want to avoid coercion regardless of the form, whether it's against transgender people, whether it's against single gender people, whether it's against anybody, right? We want to avoid coercion and violence in all forms. And that means necessarily taking on the tough arguments, the toughest arguments. If your position can withstand the toughest arguments, if they can withstand me, then you're right. And there's nothing more powerful than that. If it can't, then you're wrong. And you don't want to stick with that.
I think what neither of us fully understands is the level of violence that occurs in transgender communities. And I have no idea what they experienced before these sort of civil rights movements became more prominent over the issue. I mean,
that's not what
I don't know if
about.
It's beneficial to the violence or just provoking more.
Stop trying to put me on the side with the violent people. I'm the one person you will never hear and have never heard advocate for violence in any capacity.
I'm not saying that you are.
We're talking about how there's a possibility that language sort of encourages it. That's what I'm saying.
I'm confused about what Eric said that encouraged violence in some way.
No, I'm not saying that he did. I'm saying that implying that he said when people behave as women, it's sort of like already like saying that they're an imposter and blah blah blah, and it sort of gives people this feeling that they can invalidate people's identities by taking certain actions, but if nobody's viewed as an imposter, there's really nothing to like dismantle about it or anything. They can just walk around.
But I do view them as an imposter. That's my point.
Okay, so if you were to say that to a trans person right now, you would feel comfortable saying that to their face. I think you are an imposter.
No, I wouldn't. I'm not comfortable saying it
then,
now.
why are you saying it now,
I'm doing
then?
my duty. I'm doing my duty as a human being.
Your moral duty?
My moral duty. As I understand it, absolutely.
Interesting.
Isn't Tiff transgender?
She is, yes. And I've had this conversation with Tiffany. Okay?
What was the conclusion?
My conclusion was this, that they
No, not your conclusion. What was the conclusion of the conversation in general?
I mean, that's the same thing as what my conclusion was about it.
So you guys both agreed, is what you're telling me.
Who knows what he took away from it? I don't know. How do I know what he took away from it?
You don't remember at all? It's
I
interesting.
don't know what he took away from it because the conclusion one draws is something that happens long after the conversation is over, in the privacy of one's own head.
So it just ended abruptly without you
I
guys
don't
coming to any.
fucking remember. Why would I remember that? I don't know. I don't even remember what we were talking about. It was just sort of like we've had the conversation a couple of different times. It's not like
It's probably a good idea that this not be uploaded on the YouTube.
I disagree with you. See, that's the kind of failure that perpetuates wrongness.
I mean,
This has
if
to be
neither of us
uploaded.
are particularly, if we're neither of us are masters on this topic, then what is the
I
point
am.
in putting it out
I'm
into
a master on this topic.
Oh, interesting. I just don't think there's any point in like there's already a million pieces on Google about it. We're just adding to this like
Except none of them are
sort of
right
like
mine is. See, I'm right for the
this
right
sort of
reasons. That's the only thing that matters.
nebulous.
You have to be right for the right reasons. Other people may be right for the wrong reasons, in which case they're wrong. Or they might be wrong for the right reasons, in which case they're wrong. Or they might be wrong for the wrong reasons, in which case they're wrong. I'm right for the right reasons.
Interesting.
I think it's a really difficult concept because it is subjective on the individual, but in the objective reality of the situation, I do feel like they're kind of asking, you're a cat, but you feel and act like a dog, and it's like they want us to think that they're a dog, but it's like they are physically a cat.
Well, listen, the conclusion of the previous conversation was...
thing or anything. It's just like a hard thing to kind of... I mean, I think that everyone should be respectful of identity, but when it comes to the objective reality of the situation, I mean, if that was taken to the absolute extreme...
Listen, the previous
you could
conversation
say,
ended
like
with me concluding to defer to their feelings. The last conversation ended with me deferring to their feelings, concluding that was best. That somebody who's transgender, either, especially if they've already begun operative stages and stuff like that, that they experience too much, by far, disputing of their will. And that I don't want to pile on at all regarding that. It was a conclusion I drew. And so I shelved the issue. It's like a cancer, the wrongness, though. You don't want to let it fester. It's malignant wrongness. You know it's there. You know the wrongness is there. It makes you sick. Yeah, I hate the disputing of their will, right? I want to do this shit. The reason they think they need to be transgender is because they've been wrongly kept down regarding their behavior. They need to be able to behave however the fuck they want. I experienced my own gender oppression when I was a little kid. I wanted one of those ovens that was for chicks.
You wanted an easy bake oven?
I wanted an easy bake oven. I got it. I wanted it so bad that I insisted I get it. And in fact, my parents got it for me. And then one of my friends came over and saw it, and I dissembled, and I told them it wasn't mine. It was a present I still had to give to my cousin over there, blah, 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 blah. And I made my parents take it back, right? I still remember that. I feel great offense at the weak child that I was, that I allowed myself to be defined in that fashion. That, I don't want the oven anymore. I did want that. I wanted to cook shit in it, I envisioned myself cooking all kinds of shit in that thing. I wasn't just going to cook the little muffins or whatever that came with it. I was going to cook all kinds of things.
Barbecue steak.
And instead, I was so unsound with myself when I was a child that I told my parents to take it back. How sad is that? What a sad story. If I had had that oven, I probably would have had much better SE now. I'd be like an inventor type. But instead, I'm clumsy with knowing how things work. Why? Gender. That's why. So I continue to war against it today in my incarnation as Bringer of truth regarding transgenderism. That's the origin story for these arguments. My point is sound. Anybody should be able to behave however the fuck they want. And they need to understand the clear, bright metaphysical line between their owned metaphysical objects and those metaphysical objects owned by others. It is through the respect of that barrier.
That face, there it is.
You guys are missing a lot.
Sure. Sure.
That's it.